Good morning, welcome back to Black Bear Forge. Frequently we look at making tools, and to be honest, I really like classic tools, more traditional tools with wooden handles. These are the most pleasant to use in my mind, but they're a little bit more difficult to make than some other style tools. Now instead of a wooden handle, you can just drill a hole and use a rod handle. This one has a 5/16 rod, and I think we've made this style of tool on the channel before. But it can be even simpler than this. This is still a little bit more complicated. There's a little bit of forge work involved. Maybe you just want to make a quick tool, get back to work. And if you have a welder, that opens up lots of doors into making quick tools. So today I thought I would just make a handled center punch. A handled center punch is a really handy thing at the anvil or under the treadle hammer. And I'm just going to use a little piece of S7, and I will explain a little bit more why I like S7 when we get to the end of the video. This piece is 3 inches long, so that's 75 millimeters long, 5/8 inch in diameter, so that's about 15-16 millimeters in diameter. Use the material you have. S7 has the advantage that it is shock resisting, so it takes being hammered on very well. It also has the advantage that it holds up to high heat better than a lot of other steels, so it's not going to dull and deform just because you got it a little hotter than you meant to. We aren't going to do anything very fancy for a handle. Like I said, this is all about quick, easy tools. If you have a welder, you can do this. Our handle is going to be a piece of 1/4 by 1 flat bar. We're not going to do much forging to this. You don't have to do any forging to it if you don't want to, but I think I'll punch a hole so I can hang it on a nail. So let's go make a quick center punch. I think I'm going to start with the handle just because I can. Just rounding the end up so it doesn't have any sharp corners to snag my hand later. Like I said, I'm going to put a hole in here so I can hang it on a nail. You could just as easily grind the sharp corners off and drill a hole in here and eliminate any forging on the handle whatsoever if you want to. Not a big deal either way. So there's our hole punched. I'm just going to use the punch to drift it open just a little bit. And I'll do that from both sides. Just make a cleaner hole. That's really all I need to do to that handle. It's completely functional just like that. Round the edges off if you're concerned it might be a little uncomfortable, but you can do that with a grinder as well. And I'm going to just lightly bevel off the top here for the struck end. This probably isn't completely necessary, I just can't help myself. I'm going to make it sort of octagon, just knocking the corners off heavily. And I will do a little grinding on that to get rid of that little fish lip effect, but I think that just concentrates the blows into the center of the tool a little bit better. Then we want to taper the other end a little bit, and we need to leave enough room in the middle then that is untouched to weld this handle onto. So like any other taper, we're going to start square. We're going to get it about the size we want. And the S7 gets hard to forge as it cools off, so get it hot again. And this doesn't need to be a real pointy taper. You want a good stout tool. And we're going to go octagon. Now we're rounding it up, or have been rounding it up for a little bit. Of course, get it hot again as it starts to cool off. Between being air hardening and shock resisting, it doesn't take much for this to start resisting all your efforts. At this stage, it would be ideal to slow cool this and let it completely anneal if you can. Normalizing would be great, but technically speaking, you cannot normalize air hardening steels. Since normalizing is letting something slow cool in air, and S7 is an air hardening steel, letting it cool in air is hardening, not normalizing. It doesn't do anything to soften it, stress relieve it, anything else. If you cool it in vermiculite, it's going to cool more slowly. It will stress relieve it some, but it will not fully anneal it. Annealing is the process of making it as soft as it possibly can be, which makes it easier to grind, file, whatever you have to do to it. But to anneal most air hardening steels requires very controlled cooling in an electronic oven, and it takes about 12 hours to go through the process of bringing it down 50 or 100 degrees per hour from a specific temperature. Something I'm not going to worry about today, and that's one reason I like S7. It is a little bit more forgiving. So what I'm doing now is I'm letting it cool a little bit in the forge, and as soon as the forge and the S7 lose color, I'm going to go ahead and do the grinding on it, and I'll hold it in a pair of tongs because it will still be too hot to hold on to. I'm not going to quench it in water or do anything like that. And then we'll come back, we'll put the handle on it. Then we'll do the hardening and the tempering, which is really quite simple because it's air cooling. We don't need anything special to do that. I just went ahead and welded that on with the MIG welder because it was still hot. I didn't need to preheat it. But if you let it cool completely before you do any grinding or filing on it, it is a good idea to preheat the tool steel before you weld to it and then let it slow cool afterwards, and that helps de-stress it, makes for a stronger weld in the long run. Now, ideally, a TIG weld with stainless steel should last longer, should be a little bit stronger. But I have found that no matter how tools like this are welded, sooner or later the handle cracks and breaks. You got to grind the weld out, redo it. Not really that big a deal. You should get 3, 4, 5 years out before you have to do that. But that's an advantage to taking the time to make wooden handled tools. It is easier to swap the handles out when you need to. To harden S7, it has a higher critical temperature than a lot of the other steels you might work with in the blacksmith shop. And I'm going to go to my heat treat guide, the Heat Treat Guide Companion, and it has a search function for search for the steel, so I'll just type in S7 here, and it will come up, and it has a ton of information on here. Most of it you don't really need, but if you're curious, you can read all this. Down here, what I want to find is heat slowly to 1200 degrees and then come up to 1750. Hold for 15 to 45 minutes. Now that's for big pieces used in industry, a little tool like this. If I get it up to what I think is 1750 by guessing the color, which will be kind of a mid to high orange range, that's good enough. Then we just take it out, let it air cool, and that's all we need to do to harden it. Then we'll need to temper, and unfortunately this app doesn't get real into tempering, so we'll just have to do the best we can. So that's pretty much all I want there. Now it just slow cools. And I'm going to set the struck end down in some vermiculite here. And that way the struck end will cool even slower and will be more stress relieved and will last longer that way. And that just has to sit and cool until you can touch it. Now this has been all hardened, and I've taken it back to the grinder and just clean up the edge a little bit so I can see the tempering colors run. And I've heated up this big block of scrap in the forge, and I'm just going to heat this up a little bit. Now remember, this end is already not as hard because we let it cool in the vermiculite. This is just one way to do this. A torch would be quite simple. I just thought I would show this instead. And this may take a while. This heats it very slowly. It's a good controlled way to do things like this. Yeah, it's been about 5 minutes, and I've reheated the block because it was getting cool. And you see that's starting to go to a straw or a bronze color there. I'm going to take it until it starts to turn purple or blue. This will be used a lot on hot material. It can be a little bit softer. And S7 tempers at a hotter temperature than a lot of other steels. So it's okay to get it that hot. But that will also continue to pull some color from the hot body of the tool. So at this point, I can probably just let it sit and air cool. Now, truthfully, in use, I will quench my S7 tools in water as long as they don't have a glow to them. If they ever get hot enough to actually glow, I let them air cool. Even then, they hold up pretty well. They make good serviceable tools. An S7 in these smaller sizes, 5/8, 3/4, something like that, isn't too bad to work. When you start getting up into 1-inch square bar and bigger things for making handled tools, S7 is a whole lot of work to move. Even at a bright orange heat, it really resists hammer blows. It's shock resisting steel. That's what it's all about. But that's also what makes it hold up well. And the fact that it is an air hardening steel really makes the heat treat fairly simple and straightforward. There's no oil, nothing to mess with. It's neat, it's clean. You just have to think about it a little bit more. And of course, you can't normalize it, and you can't really do a full anneal unless you want to get really technical about it. Nevertheless, that's a quick and simple way to make top tools so you get your hand out of the way and strike that with a hammer while you're working at an anvil. This is too small to use a striker with, in my opinion, so I wouldn't use these for a striker. But under the treadle hammer at the anvil, tools like this are really handy, really useful. And because they're so easy to make, you can make multiple sizes and styles of chisels and punches just in an afternoon. I probably don't have a half an hour's worth of work in this thing total. During the cooling processes and things like that, I just went about my business in the shop, and I did other things and let this cool and then came back to it. But there is no reason you couldn't make a tool like this out of W1, 01, 4140, whatever your favorite flavor of tool steel is. Feel free to use it. This is just a way of making the tool. It doesn't have to be made out of the S7. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, I would love it if you hit that subscribe button down there. Feel free to stick around, watch a few of the other videos, share the videos with your friends, then make time in your day to get out to your shop, make something, but be safe, wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next one.